Welcome to On the Edge of Breakthrough, where hope meets innovation in the fight against cancer.
Hi, I'm Dr. Monty Pal. I'm a medical oncologist at City of Hope, and I'm really excited to bring to you On the Edge of Breakthrough, Voices of Cancer Research. We're going to be bringing some of our best researchers to the table to discuss exciting findings from their laboratories, from their research programs, and really get some great perspectives on what their plans are for the future. Welcome, everyone, to On the Edge of Breakthrough, Voices of Cancer Research, a podcast from City of Hope. I'm Monty Pal, and I'm a GU medical oncologist, and today's quite exciting. We're actually recording at the ASCO Annual Meeting. I have not just one, but two guests, Dr. Walter Stadler and Dr. Bryce. Guys, how's it going?
Hey, it's great. I'm glad to be here.
Going well. ASCO is always a busy time for us. Lots of great data, and it's fun to have a GU podcast. Here we are, the City of Hope GU team. So it's a good day.
It's the brain trust.
Yeah, brain trust. There we go.
So just by way of introduction, Dr. Stadler actually is the Chief Clinical Officer at the City of Hope Chicago site. Dr. Bryce, the head of our City of Hope Phoenix site. Tell me, you guys were both incredibly successful in your respective careers at the University of Chicago, at the Mayo Clinic. What was it that drew you to City of Hope? Maybe we could start with you, Walt.
Yeah, so I think, as you said, I've been at had been at the University of Chicago for 30 years, but this was an opportunity, I think, to help build a national system of providing world-class care and research closer to where patients live.
Awesome. And tell us about the Chicago site. Where is it? Where's it located?
The main site is located in a town called Zion, which is just a train stop away from the Wisconsin border. But we also have clinics in Morton Grove, which is one of the northwestern suburbs, as well as downtown.
Excellent. Now, and if you could start with the same question, I'm so curious. Everybody knows the work that you've done in prostate cancer at the Mayo Clinic. You chaired a very successful department there. What sort of drew you over to City of Hope?
I would say it's really kind of mission driven, right? So I've been in Arizona for 14 years. 3 of my children have been born there. It's a great place to live, but Phoenix is a very unique city, right? It's one of the fastest growing cities in the country. And yet, if you look at it, you realize the vast majority of medical care in Phoenix is really taken care of in a private practice setting. It's unique, I would say, amongst all the big cities in the country. Phoenix is the 5th biggest metro area, and yet there isn't one large-scale academic cancer center. 95% of patients are taken care of in private practice, and I wanted to solve that problem. What happened is City of Hope developed a plan to go national. They said Phoenix was one of the primary cities they wanted to get started in. And then my friends at City of Hope called and said, Alan, would you be willing to come over and help us do this in the city of Phoenix? And my answer was, well, what took you so long? This is exactly what I've been trying to do for a long time. It's that specific mission, quite frankly. The city of Phoenix should have a City of Hope in type organization in the city. Who was going to do it? How was it going to get done? And when it all came together, I think it was the perfect confluence of events, right? We want to build a academic, research-driven cancer practice for all Arizonans so that people don't have to leave the state in order to get that level of care.
Well, that's brilliant. It's a great vision. And we're going to get back to exercising that vision and how we can sort of integrate the various centers in just a moment here. But I'd love to hear a little bit about your journey into oncology, Walt. I've seen you at many a meeting. And for our listeners, Walt has this reputation for asking the most pressing questions at our medical meetings and really challenging investigators to think differently about research. So a brilliant mind from that perspective. But what was it that sort of drew you into the field?
I had always been fascinated, even in high school and college, of the biology of cancer. What makes these normal cells behave in this weird manner? And that was also always a fascinating question to me. And I always wanted to be a doctor. And it's the cliche, but it's true. I wanted to have an impact on individual people and individual patients and their families. And I wasn't sure for a while as to was I going to be able to sort of manage the psychosocial aspects of cancer care? But as I did some of that care in my training, I realized that this is where I belong.
That's really cool. And I will say, you've mentioned some of the top folks in our field, but you've also been mentored by some luminaries. Can you tell us a little about that?
I think probably my primary mentor was Nick Vogelzang, who has since unfortunately passed away. And he was my primary mentor when I was in my oncology training. And there's sort of two things that I take away from that experience. The first was that Nick was the kind of guy that had 1,000 ideas a minute, and most of them were crap. But since he had so many more ideas than any one of us did, all I had to do was sort of sit in his office and decide which was a good idea and then execute. And so my entire early career was essentially executing the good ideas that Nick had, and he had a lot more good ideas than most of us. The other important thing that I learned from Nick is how to connect with patients. Nick had this amazing ability to connect with patients, and the story I tell is we had these crazy clinics. They always went late. You'd see the patient as a fellow. Then they would wait 2 hours to see Nick. The fellows, we would want to go home. I mean, it's 6:30. It's time to go home. I'm tired. And Nick would walk into that patient's room. The patient was ticked. The family was mad as hell. And Nick would sit down, and the fellow was ticked because he wanted to go home and was bored and half falling asleep. And within 5 minutes, Nick had been able to connect with those patients. And if Nick would have told them they had to walk over hot coals in their bare feet in order to cure their cancer, they would have asked where to start. It was that ability to connect, which I don't have naturally, but I think I learned some of that from him.
That's brilliant. Nick was one of my mentors as well through SWOG, and I agree with on everything that you just said there. Just a wonderful, wonderful guy. Alan, maybe I'll turn to you. I'm curious. I know a little bit about your journey into oncology, and I know it was, a bit of a meandering path into GU oncology. Tell our audience about that.
My father would always remind me, he said I was maybe 14 when I told him I was going to be a medical oncologist. And honestly reflecting, I don't know why exactly. We don't have any doctors in the family. It's not that there was a lot of cancer history per se, but I think it was a time when I thought I wanted to be a doctor, but I looked at the science. I realized cancer is where so much of where we're struggling, right? We're looking for cures. It was a big, difficult problem. It was going to take a lot of effort, a lot of smart people working on it. And I thought, well, all right, big and difficult, and it's in medicine. That's probably where I need to be, or so I thought. What did I know as a teenager? But I went through all the standard path we all went through, right? You go to college, you do some research, say, all right, I think I like cancer. My inclination is towards genetics and biochemistry and cell biology. It all kind of lines up. I worked in pharma for a while. I was a medicinal chemist at a pharma company, actually working on RNA modifications back in the day before that became everything that it is today, right? On antisense molecules. And then I went to medical school, and I would say along the way, I threw myself into every rotation. I considered everything, but everything I considered, whether surgery, whether medicine, peds, OBGYN, everything was always the cancer aspect. I think I always came back to that. So medical oncology was always what I thought I wanted to do, and everything, every step along the way seemed to affirm that. In terms of getting into GU, so I did my residency at Mayo Clinic, and I was very fortunate. I had fantastic early mentors, so I really started out in the myeloma space. So Angela Dispenzieri was one of my primary mentors. She's a thought leader in dysproteinemias at Mayo. Also Bob Kyle, the father of myeloma. I was fortunate. My very first papers were with Dr. Kyle. He has 2,000 plus publications, and a couple of them are with me. And, it's a little point of pride, right? At one point, I guess I was really just supposed to stay on that track. It's a really well-developed pathway to do myeloma at Mayo and stay in Minnesota. But I took a bit of a left turn and decided to go into private practice in Santa Barbara, which was fantastic. It was a great group. Really enjoyed working there. But I realized after about a year that it didn't permit me the opportunity to really push the field forward, which is really where my drive is, my commitment is to say, look, we have to find a cure, right? I mean, I absolutely respect what our private practice colleagues do, what our community physician colleagues do. It's the critical part of the medical infrastructure, but I thought my role really is more being on the research end to try to find answers, right? Try to find the answers we haven't found yet. So actually, the true story of this is I told my wife, here we are living in Santa Barbara in paradise, and I said, I want to go back into academia. I'm going to call my friends. And fortunately, she's very supportive and said, okay. And then the next morning, before I'd done anything, I had an email from the Mayo Clinic saying, we have a job in GU oncology. Would you be interested? So that's it. That's how I came back into academia. That's how I became a GU doctor after having done myeloma for all the early part of my career. I always say the principles of cancer are all the same, right? What causes cancer, the process of oncogenesis, how we intervene, how we try to cure disease. The principles cross cancers. It just comes down to the specifics. So then I had to spend a few months really diving into the GU literature and educating myself. And I spent time up at UCSF. And that's why I still say my primary mentors in this field, my first mentors were Eric Small and Chuck Ryan, and still are to this day. And then, like both of you, Nick Vogelsang, who was practicing in Vegas, was often in Phoenix, and he was a tremendous resource for me. He really gave me a lot of guidance, helped me get established. So I really look at those three who really helped me get started. And then I joined the Alliance with Mayo, and Walt, Dr. Stadler, helped become a mentor as well, and that whole leadership team there, Mike Morris and others. So, I've been very fortunate that despite the fact that I was far away from all these people, they were willing to invest time in helping me grow my career in Phoenix.
It's a small world, isn't it? And it's amazing how all of us sort of coalesced around the same people, same mentors, et cetera. It's pretty wild. I wanted to shift gears a little bit and give our audience a sense of the research that you both are so well known for. And Walt, as I think about all the data that you've presented over the years and the large trials that you've been a part of and so forth, I always think about pragmatic trial designs when I think about you. And I think about the randomized discontinuation trials that you worked on, some of the studies that you've done around dosing in the context of food intake. Can you give the audience a little flavor for the types of research that you're most interested in?
Over the years, I think my research has changed a little bit. When I started in this career, I sometimes tell people I started in GU oncology, not only because of the mentors, but because we only had 3 drugs and I didn't have to learn very much. So there's a lot of opportunity too. So much of it was trying to develop new therapies, testing new therapies and so forth. So one thing I focused on a little bit is to start to think about how do we keep things simple? How do we make sure that we ask simple questions that give us simple answers and not overcomplicated? I think a second thing that's related to this, and I think I do have to credit Mark Retain as one of my mentors here also, is that we still develop drugs the same way we did 35 years ago, even though the drugs we're developing are so much different. And one principle is that when we started, a lot of the agents we had very narrow therapeutic windows. In other words, the dose that was effective was very close to the dose that was highly toxic. And so therefore, we developed designs that focused on giving what, in essence, was the highest tolerable dose. But that's not the case with things like the hormone therapies, the immunotherapies, and so forth. And so we are now dosing drugs in a manner that doesn't make pharmacologic sense, and we need to go back and revisit that. And I would say that the third thing that's sort of struck me, and in some ways prostate cancer is the poster child for this, is that the underserved are not participating in our trials. And the example is that 10 to 15% of the prostate cancer population in this country is Black. If you look at all of the major studies in prostate cancer, you're lucky if 2% of that population is Black. And we know that the Black population, at least in certain degrees, has different incidence of certain genetic abnormalities. And so we actually don't even know that our therapies are representative and appropriate for some populations. So melding some of these things together, simplifying the trials, and making sure that we can get some of our underserved populations to be part of our clinical trials is one of my initiatives these days.
I think that one of the powers that sits within having City of Hope now sprawled across Chicago and Atlanta and Phoenix is diversity. We have this amazing opportunity, I think, to capture a very diverse population of patients and really reconcile some of these issues that you brought up, which are inherent in the clinical trials that we see up at the podium today.
And that's exactly what I meant when I started earlier saying to bring care and research closer to where people live. I mean, the Zion location here in Illinois, it's located in a working class, underserved neighborhood in northern Illinois, close to a naval training base. And this is also an area where there are a lot of patients who struggle getting even standard of care, let alone some of the research access.
That's brilliant. Ellen, I'm going to turn to you next. Now, when I heard that you were coming to City of Hope, when you announced it to me, it was right after you stepped off the ASCO GU podium, I believe, maybe a year or two ago. At that point, you had simultaneous publication in the New England Journal for a novel drug for prostate cancer. And that's kind of how I think of you, really sort of pushing the envelope in terms of drug development in prostate cancer and other GU cancers. If you don't mind, just give the audience a flavor for the types of research you're interested in.
I think fairly early on, what I recognized is I was always looking for what is it about my patient sitting in front of me or the disease affecting them that was kind of unique, or what was the detail that was going to drive the difference here. And so in a sense, even from the time I was fellow or even a resident, I had this kind of inclination to say, we need to be more precise. This whole idea of precision medicine, right? Because most of our paradigms are really based more on a broad kind of general statement of one size fits all, right? If X and Y, then Z. I've always said the efforts for precision medicine date back to the 1600s and the plague in London. I don't think people realize it's a talk I often give. The London Bills of Mortality was the first effort in history to categorize cause of death on a population level. These were published on a weekly basis in the London Times while the plague swept through the city. And if you go back and read them, they're fascinating. Some of it's quite literal. We'll talk about fell from the bell tower at St. Dumfries, or somebody dies of tuberculosis consumption back then. But some of it was mysterious. Back then, a lot of people died of rising of the lights. I have no idea what that is, but it terrifies me. Don't let the lights rise, okay? But as medical science has progressed, we've gotten more and more precise, specific in how we diagnose things. But I think that way of thinking, as I now reflect back, has always driven the kind of questions I asked as I started doing research, and even what I continue doing now, of saying, I really need to be able to get to a specific answer for this specific case. It's not the general case. It's not what happens in 1,000 patients. It's what's going to happen in this one patient, and how do I give this one patient the best outcome? And I think that kind of thinking is what's framed my approach to research. Nowadays, genomics obviously is a big tool in that. So that's why I was one of the early adopters in that space, I think, and part of how I started to make my name in the field. But there, it wasn't about the technique. It wasn't about the technology for me. It was about trying to answer this question of, what can I do better for this one individual? Why is this individual's process different than every other patient I've ever seen? One of the points of advice I've always carried very early on from Dr. Kyle is he always said, be a disease expert, not a technique expert. That's the other way I've always framed my approach, is we have to be dedicated to thinking about the totality of the disease process. You can't walk into a patient room and say, well, because I'm the immunotherapy guy, you're going to get immunotherapy. Or because I'm a urologist, you're going to get a prostatectomy and not radiation. Our obligation is to do what's right for the individual. So for the one patient sitting in front of us. So that's why my approach has always been, I have to be a disease expert. I have to be knowledgeable about the breadth of every option available to my patient, and then bring that bent on precision then to say, for this individual patient, which one of these, many options are the best? And I think it's that thought process that drives my research focus.
I have so much respect for you guys, because on top of building a healthcare system in your respective cities, right? I think you've both stayed very active, and I can speak to this personally in our research portfolio at City of Hope and GU Cancers. I'm just curious now, what are your plans? How do you think we can really harness this immense strength that we have now as this collective enterprise across the country? Maybe Alan, I'll start with you. You talked about precision medicine. Is there the stuff we can do there?
Without question, the technology is advancing. At City of Hope in Arizona, one of our critical crown jewel pieces of our practice is TGen, the Translational Genomics Research Institute, which had been founded by Jeff Trent and Dan Von Hoff over 20 years ago in Arizona. And they're still one of the leading, if not the leading, genomics technology development research institutes in the world. And that's part of what we have in City of Hope in Arizona. So even now, there's new tests that have developed in the last year. We have a test called AltSeq, which will fully characterize newly diagnosed AML within about 72 hours, right? That whole panel of tests that usually take a couple of weeks that our patients, and if you remember back to fellowship, you'd admit an AML patient, you start them on general 7+3 while waiting for all the testing to come back to tell you what genotype you're actually dealing with. And even now, with commercial assays, that's typically taking 10 to 14 days, but TGen's got an assay, CLIA CAP certified now, that turns around in less than 72 hours. In fact, the median time for turnaround when we order this test is about 36 hours. So the patients don't have to get Hydrea or 7+3 to control the disease for 2 weeks while we wait. Same thing, same kind of test has just been developed for multiple myeloma. Again, CLIA CAP certified, that one's called JSeq. But that's getting fairly narrow and specific. In the more general sense, what are we trying to achieve? What can we leverage to build out the system? I think on the most macro level, the challenges we have in the American cancer system are access. We have challenges with the geographic distribution of access to cancer care, right? Urban Americans have pretty good access. Rural Americans have poor access. So there's a geographic disparity that we have to care about. There's a socioeconomic disparity we have to care about. At the provider level, there's not enough physicians across the board. We know this is a problem. So again, that plays into access because there's not enough providers to take care of the patients. But then there's the issue at the individual oncologist level is the sheer rapidity with which advances are developing. How do we all keep up, right? How does the individual oncologist keep up with 15,000 publications a year coming down the pipe? Obviously, the answer is, no one can. And so we know that this problem leads to issues with slowness in adoption. You get a new trial announced here at ASCO, and in all likelihood, 2 years from now, you're still going to see that a majority of patients aren't getting the advantage of that new data, right? I mean, this is what we see in real world data over and over again. So I think this is one of the critical roles that City of Hope and other large cancer centers are going to play. There's a lot of infrastructure necessary to provide these systems that can support the increasing complexity of care. I think physicians and providers need this support. And we'll talk about some of this as AI tools. Some of it is just systems, operational pieces. But the fact of the matter is, as a medical oncologist, none of us can do what we do alone, right? You drop us off on a desert island somewhere without pathology, radiology. I mean, there's not much we can do to help people, right? What we do is absolutely dependent on a very large village. We need pathology, radiology, surgery, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. As medicine gets ever more complex, right, the complexity of the team necessary to support top quality care keeps getting bigger, keeps getting more difficult to deliver. I think treating cancer is a systems issue. It's really not down to an individual physician. And that means we have to set our egos aside a little bit because some people don't like hearing that, right? But I think to me, it's an undeniable truth. And so that's part of what my job is now, what Walt's doing here in Chicago, right, is to build up the systems that support the providers. We need to support the providers so that the providers can focus on the patient, right? The provider in the room can't be worried about the healthcare delivery. They can't be worried about the billing. They can't be worried about the prior auth. They have to be able to focus on the patient. And we have to build the systems, right, that provide all the necessary support and infrastructure to let them do what's best for the patient.
And let me riff off of that a little bit. I think that some of these system issues that you talk about are capital intensive. They cost a lot of money. And yet in the long run, they can save money. We know that in this day and age, you probably need a disease-specific, highly expert pathologist to help make the diagnosis, to choose the right therapy. And yet, there are very few institutions that have enough volume to hire a specific expert in each one of the disease areas. But as a large system, and with the use of digital pathology and digital tools, you now can theoretically hire a pathologist that is an expert in a narrow area, but that can serve an entire large system across the country, and they don't have to be physically located where that slide in that patient might be. And those are some of the things that, excite me and make me sort of interested.
I love that. And I hadn't thought about that. Maybe having expert breast pathologist at Chicago that we all lead on, or an expert GU pathologist at Atlanta, and so on and so forth.
And it goes on and on. It's radiology. It's the ability to do the genomic testing. It's the ability to, provide virtual support through home digital tools for patients, and to think about how we can better monitor, toxicity and so forth. All of that costs money to start, but once it's in place, it's highly scalable. And this is where large systems like this come into play.
And we'll talk about clinical trials. How does going national for us kind of change the game? I mean, for years, it was just us in Duarte. That was the way it was when I started at City of Hope. I mean, now it's just a massive, massive catchment that we've got.
I think it helps in many different ways. I think that, once again, it's the scale that makes a difference. So first of all, I think it, as we talked about earlier, enhances access to underserved populations that may not travel all the way up through Pasadena and to Duarte, now are a little bit closer to where they live. I think it allows a system to think about doing trials for more rare diseases. And frankly, almost all of our cancers are now becoming rare diseases as we, personalize and conduct more precision medicine, which Alan talked about earlier. It allows us in what is, to be honest, a competitive, clinical trial business environment to attract funders and sponsors, because we can now deliver that many more patients for any particular trial. And then finally, that size also makes it much more feasible for individual faculty to conduct their investigator-initiated trials. We're no longer limited to doing a 14-patient trial because that's all the patients we're going to see in Duarte. If I think I need to do a 50 or 60 or 70-patient trial, we have a whole country to do that in.
Brilliant. I want to talk about the brain trust. You alluded to this earlier, and it really is true, honestly. You think about our GU program now, we've got Alan, yourself, Walt, yourself, Tanya Dorff. I mean, all three very well-respected leaders in that area. We have Abhishek Tripathi running our bladder cancer program. We have, I'm at the helm of our kidney cancer program. Terrific young faculty member, Alex Tarazi-Raffel, who's heading testis cancer. I think for the first time ever, we're really well poised to have dominance within these various diseases, large and small. So with that in mind, tell us how to execute on that brain trust. How can that help, for instance, the folks who are at some of our network sites in terms of guiding patient care and therapy? Alan?
Absolutely. You get this question of, again, the doctors at the network sites who see a wide variety of cancers. Maybe at some of the bigger network sites, they specialize a little bit, but in general, specialization requires critical mass. So a doctor in a med onc in a 2 or 3 doctor office is going to see kind of the full breadth of heme and onc, right? But with the virtual tools that we've set up, with the tumor board processes we've set up, there is the opportunity for people to be able to ask very quickly questions of the experts and do so in an asynchronous fashion. The problem with tumor boards, of course, is everybody's got to show up at a certain time on a certain day. But you have the question while you're sitting there in clinic, right? And you don't want to have to wait a week to get an answer. So as you know, we have this internal tool set up for people to put questions to the group. Hey, I've got a patient in scenario XYZ. What do people recommend? So Monty, of course, you've been, helping out the entire national network of people with RCC questions, right? And I'll tell you, one of our community docs in Arizona got an answer from you on their complex question, and they were tickled pink that Monty Pal came in and gave them guidance, right? And this is what they got from being part of City of Hope, whereas in their previous, career, they couldn't get that kind of immediate in-depth guidance, right? So I think that's part of what we're building out. And of course, the more frequently we answer these questions, each time we do it, it elevates, right, the knowledge of the group and strengthens people's both their knowledge base and their comfort in dealing with complexity or the atypical or the nuanced. So it's an educational process as well as a support process. I agree with you completely. It's really fun, quite frankly. The people we have in this group, when Walt decided to join him, we just keep looking at our GU group and how it's grown and who we have. And it's one of the real pleasures, of course, for us in academia, the conversations we have as colleagues, right? We enjoy this and not just a podcast, but whether it's sitting at dinner or sitting on tumor board, it's really a pleasure to be part of this group at City of Hope. And I think that we will really be able to elevate the level of care in disparate communities across the network now. I don't think people realize that City of Hope has nearly 40 community oncology practices across the country, right? We're not just talking about our 5 big centers. We're talking about a greater number of our hem-onc physicians are in these community practices, taking care of more patients than we are at the main campuses. And again, that extends the reach of the institution, brings us expertise to more communities. That's a systems issue to do this well and to set it up. But I think that's what this organization has committed it to. And I'm excited to be part of that.
So I'm being way too selfish, by the way, focusing on Gio, but I will say all the cards are falling into place for us across diseases. We have Marwan Faqih, world's expert in colon cancer. Hope Rugo was just recruited in breast cancer, which is super exciting. Kristen Higgins, world-renowned in thoracic oncology, lung cancer, is leading up our Atlanta site. So it just feels to me like we're reaching that critical mass in terms of really having that sort of dominant area of specialty within each respective field. I think it's super exciting. I'm going to actually shift gears and talk about what we're here to do at ASCO, look at, evaluate, and present research. Alan, you just had a terrific presentation. Was it yesterday morning, Saturday morning? Would you mind sharing that with the audience?
Well, yeah, so this was a 5-year update on the CCGA3 sub-study, which is one of the studies of the multi-cancer early detection tests that have been developed by GRAIL. Again, this is another variant on how to use genomic technology, right, to improve outcomes for patients. And I think we absolutely all agree the best way to cure cancer is detect it early, right? Detect it early, be able to come in with a curative intervention. We know that current screening tests remain limited. And frankly, most cancers don't have good screening tests, right? And even when we have a good screening test like PSA and prostate cancer, still the controversy surrounding that can be profound. So GRAIL is one of many companies trying to develop a better serum test that's more applicable across many cancers and not just, right, the few for which we have good screening. This is absolutely a path that the research has to continue. We have to solve this problem. Our goal, all of us, is to put ourselves out of business, right? We want cancer to be diagnosed at early stages so our surgeons can cure it, right? So that they never have to reach medical oncology. Even better, if we can get to the point of cancer prevention, right? Prevention even earlier than detection is where we'd like to get. But if we can't get the full prevention, let's get to early detection. And, the GRAIL data set now between research and the commercially assayed patients is over 300,000 patients. So the experience is growing, getting ever more precise as the test continues to improve. I commend, GRAIL and the other companies that are working in this space for taking on the difficult challenge of trying to develop a new screening test, right? Because that's a very difficult space to be in from a research perspective, but it's something we need to do.
Well said. I mean, really proud to see that work emerging from City of Hope, from you. Congratulations on that. Well, at this meeting, anything that really sort of caught your eye in our field or even outside of our field as being potentially practice changing?
I'm not sure that, there was anything that was particularly profound or practice changing. But what I think I've noticed is it's the increasing importance of immunotherapy writ broadly, not just the checkpoint inhibitors, but cellular therapy, bispecific antibodies. That's becoming increasingly important. I think that's clear. I think to Alan's point earlier, the increasing importance of subclassifying diseases that then can be treated appropriately with the therapy for that particular subset. As we're speaking here, there's a plenary session on breast cancer with ESR1 mutations, right? Things that we never would have thought about previously. Interestingly, we've talked a little bit, I think, about cost of care and so forth. There's some interesting articles, for example, of using here at the meeting of using literally 1/10 of the dose of nivolumab with similar effects in low resource countries. And getting back to what I said earlier about we may be overdosing many of our therapies. And so I think that's also sort of caught my eye. So I think that there's perhaps not the headline grabbing research this year, but certainly ongoing steady progress in many of the areas we talked about.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with you. I mean, a lot of focus on immunotherapy, a lot of focus on partitioning patients on a molecular basis. So really a great way to sort of advance treatment, I think. Turning back to your respective centers, Chicago and Phoenix, I've had the chance in this new role that I've taken on as Vice Chair of Academic Affairs to reach out to some of the folks who are stationed at those places, probably more so Phoenix than Chicago at this point, but I have just been so impressed by some of the faculty that we've hired there. And I wonder if you could just take a moment to spotlight one or two that you're particularly impressed by as well. Alan, maybe I'll start with you.
Yeah, absolutely. I will tell you, we have been recruitment and retention is one of the foundations of building a cancer center, obviously. And I've been recruiting constantly since I joined almost 2 years ago, and we are getting a tremendous high quality of people joining the center, really because of the City of Hope name and because of our mission. People believe in how City of Hope approaches cancer care and what we're trying to build. So I could highlight a couple. One of our earliest recruits, Gagandeep Singh, a surgical oncologist, came from City of Hope Duarte. You know him well, an unequivocal world leader in the field of hepatobiliary surgery, also neuroendocrine cancer surgery, most particularly in terms of liver resection and treatment of intrahepatic metastatic disease. And he's a tremendous thought leader. And a tremendous mentor. We added it. Paul Gelhaus came to us from the University of Iowa, a fantastic urologic oncologist. He's our director of robotic surgery, an absolutely incredible surgeon. And, we're very fortunate to convince him to come join us from Iowa. Again, another surgical recruit, we added David Luyambazi from Virginia, a leader in HIPEC, a tremendous surgeon. Again, adding a service line to West Phoenix that otherwise didn't exist, right? I mean, within 25 miles, there's not another surgeon doing what he does here again in, the nation's 5th largest metro, right? So, and then on the medical oncology side, Amit Kulkarni, a lung cancer oncologist, has joined us from the University of Minnesota.
I've been impressed as to how easy it is to recruit to a good institution. I've been with City of Hope now 4 months, and in those 4 months, I've recruited 4 or 5 people, which was unheard of in sort of a major academic center. And speaking about some of the integration across the system, we have a young surgeon by the name of Shen Li who came to me and said, gosh, I have some of these ideas in regards to genomics and thinking about doing some retrospective genomic studies. And I said, well, great. We have a whole repository of historical genomic studies. And why don't I put you in touch with some of the folks from TGen that can help you in terms of analyzing it in the bioinformatics? The folks from TGen immediately said, great, let's work together.
I have to reiterate some of those names that you brought up, Alan. I'll highlight Gagandeep Singh, who I've shared a clinical practice with for over a decade. And I have some of the toughest liver surgery cases that I've sent his way. A patient comes to mind who's now 75 years old. He was diagnosed with collecting duct kidney cancer, which the three of us know is, invariably fatal in most cases within 6 to 9 months. This patient's been alive for 15 years at this point, thanks to Gagandeep and some really amazing surgeries he's done. And Amit Kulkarni, a thoracic oncologist who just joined right out the gate. Right after he joined, he reached out to me and started expressing interest in doing some of these microbiome-based studies that we've become, I think, somewhat well known for at the Duarte campus. And I'm really looking forward to building that bridge between Duarte and Chicago and Phoenix and really making sure that we're all working together very closely. And it's just going to be very, very cool. We're wrapping up now, and I'm going to ask you something I ask every guest who comes on this program. It's sort of become a standard for us. The title of this podcast begins with On the Edge of Breakthrough. What does that mean to you guys? Maybe, Alan, I'll start with you. What does being on the edge of breakthrough mean?
One of the wonderful things about City of Hope is the fundamental and absolutely unquestioned commitment to research. The commitment is to finding a cure. And everything about the way our institution is set up is to maximize the opportunity to drive research and find cures and improve care for our patients. So where are the cures going to come from? I mean, it can come from a lot of different places depending on the cancer. Again, we talked about early detection. Obviously, it could be immunotherapy, it could be cellular therapies, it could be improved surgical techniques. Across the vast spectrum of disease, across the vast spectrum of the different things that we as humans suffer from, I mean, there's going to be a lot of different tools necessary to achieve that cure. It's not ever going to be any one thing. I really emphasize that to be on the cutting edge, that's actually multidimensional, right? There's a lot of different cutting edges that we have to push along. You actually don't know which one's going to hit, right? There's going to be varied answers across various different scenarios. That's another reason, yet again, why it really requires a village. It requires a big team. It requires a commitment from all of us to be willing to continue to ask questions and do the hard work of following the scientific process, right, to pursue new answers. When we talk about what is hope, I answer it a couple of different ways. I think on the one hand, hope is the glue that binds together our commitment to our patients, our commitment to showing up every day, to doing our very best, and to delivering the best of what we have for everyone in front of us. But on another level, hope is also a duty, right? No matter what's going on in the world, whatever we may be struggling with at a national level, at a business level, at a personal level, whatever might be happening on a given day, our commitment is to continue to hope, right? Hope is a duty because we have to believe that, our purpose in this world is to make the world a better place. And, whether we feel we are supported in that or not, we never give up on that commitment. We don't do it just because it's convenient. We do it because we should. We do it because it's the right thing to do. So to me, hope is a duty. And once you accept that, then I think absolutely I have to continue to push the edge, be on the edge, because we haven't cured cancer yet. And until we've done that, we can't back off.
So the audience should know that was not scripted. You just came up with that right now. That is beautiful. It's so brilliant. Now, well, you have the tough task of following that.
Yeah, I don't know if I can follow all that up. You talked about the edge of breakthroughs. I think that there's two aspects of that. First is, I think as Ellen mentioned, there's an increasing minority of patients that we are curing. And I don't use that word lightly, but curing in scenarios that we would have never thought possible. Right? We are seeing immunotherapies, we're seeing cellular therapies where patients are almost certainly cured of their disease. That never happened. And we are working on, and we need to continue to work on, increasing the number of patients who are cured. The other aspect, though, is that there is a large majority of patients, cancer patients these days, for which we are performing highly effective chronic care. And chronic care in a manner that allows patients to live out their lives with minimal toxicities and with their cancer disease controlled. And I think in our field, in the prostate cancer field, that is an example. I mean, my clinic has been full of 80 and 90-year-old men who I've been treating for 15, sometimes even 20 years for their disease, who are living, enjoying their families, enjoying their grandkids, doing the things that they want to do. And that also is what we need to continue to work on so that all of our cancer patients can experience that.
Brilliant. Well, guys, thank you so much for taking the time out of a very busy ASCO to sit down with me and chat. I think this is incredibly useful for our audience to really sort of get a glimpse into some of the conversations that, frankly, we're actually having literally every week, right, together. And I look forward to working with you as we continue to build City of Hope.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This podcast was produced in partnership with Amaze Media Lab.